The Galactic Council had stood unchallenged for millennia, its members bound by a strict code of etiquette that served as both a barrier and a bridge between civilizations. Every species had conformed to the ancient rites, recitations of lineage, symbolic gestures of deference, and verbal labyrinths designed to show submission before integration. Those who failed to follow protocol were deemed uncivilized, unfit for interstellar diplomacy. When Earth's signal reached the Council's listening beacons, anticipation grew. A new species had cracked faster-than-light communication, a clear indicator of maturity. Invitations were sent. Observers prepared. Expectation hung like gravity in the chamber. What arrived instead shattered the illusion of order. The human delegation didn't enter with ceremonial robes, didn't bow, and offered no elaborate greetings. They stepped into the chamber dressed plainly, voices clear and unadorned, speaking directly without metaphor or honorific. A pause followed, not from awe, but confusion. Council dignitaries waited for the ritual submission, the knee bent in symbolic humility, the invocation of the Council's 1,000-year-old charter. Instead, they got a nod, a handshake, and a simple phrase: "We're here to talk." No games, no performances. To the Council, it was a violation of cosmic decorum. The elders of the Sulvac line whispered among themselves. The Triharmony delegates signaled distress pheromones. The Vrel, known for reciting family trees spanning 7 centuries before any negotiation, felt insulted. One by one, representatives expressed their discomfort, not through confrontation, but through exaggerated protocol. Lengthy responses, padded with titles and pleasantries, tried to bury the humans in tradition. But Earth's delegation responded with unsettling calm, cutting through wordplay with sharp, factual questions. Why do negotiations require a week of formality before agenda setting? Why are aid proposals delayed by ceremonial exchanges? Why must a species prove worth through feigned reverence? There were no raised voices, just blunt efficiency. The Council structure, forged on shared protocol, began to feel exposed. What had once been seen as sacred ritual now resembled obstruction. Humanity wasn't disrespectful, they were disinterested in pretense. The murmurs that followed were not just of disdain. Some were tinged with curiosity. A few younger species leaned forward. They had endured centuries of crawling through diplomatic molasses, their progress stifled by endless ceremonies. Earth's approach was a revelation. No hierarchy. No honorific chains. Just clarity. The Council attempted subtle correction. During the second convening, they placed Earth seats lower than others, a silent gesture demanding humility. The humans, unimpressed, adjusted their chairs to eye level and resumed discussion. An elder delegate quoted an ancient passage about unity through ritual. Earth's reply: "Unity is forged through purpose, not performance." Behind closed doors, panic stirred. The humans were gaining attention. Their refusal to conform had not bred isolation, it had attracted allies. Species frustrated with endless ceremonial delays saw opportunity. If Earth could stand firm, perhaps they too could question tradition. The Council wasn't prepared for that kind of influence. Their authority relied on uniform behavior. Every species followed the script. Until now. Earth's directness wasn't just a social affront, it was a challenge to the Council's foundation. And yet their data was precise. Their insights were valuable. Their proposals, stripped of ceremonial excess, addressed problems faster than any other delegation. Council members found themselves referencing Earth's models during closed sessions, even as they condemned their style publicly. The shift was undeniable. Humanity had entered not with reverence, but with results. They didn't flatter, didn't defer, and didn't pretend. They engaged on terms of action. While others prepared ornate speeches, Earth delivered solutions. And though the Council didn't admit it aloud, a quiet reckoning had begun. A species had arrived that would not kneel, and for the first time in millennia, the Council didn't know how to respond. The Council's discomfort grew as Earth continued to disregard the unspoken laws of interstellar decorum. Each session magnified the gap. Where others approached discussions with elaborate preambles and metaphor-laden language, humans opened with direct statements and measurable objectives. They ignored ritual greetings, dismissed poetic pleasantries, and steered every dialogue towards substance. What began as offense turned into confusion, then unease. They weren't just skipping customs, they were rewriting the pace of diplomacy. Requests that would once take cycles to navigate through protocol-laden chains were resolved by Earth's representatives in hours. They presented agreements with no ceremonial seals, no honor-bound introductions, no offerings of tribute. They provided transparent data sets, clear terms, and actionable outcomes. No bows, no long-winded affirmations, no elaborate gifts. They made interstellar governance look almost practical. In one instance, a resource-sharing agreement that traditionally required 7 phases of ceremonial exchange was condensed by Earth into a 3-page memorandum. The participating species, relieved by the efficiency, signed without hesitation. Others observed the interaction and noted the absence of disaster. No insult had sparked war. No collapse of dignity followed. Instead, it worked. Some within the council interpreted the change as dangerous, fearing cultural erosion. Committees were formed to assess the impact of procedural disruption. Earth was summoned to hearings meant to correct their behavior. But the humans didn't apologize. They questioned the premise. Why should diplomacy depend on performative submission? What value was truly lost when tradition was bypassed in favor of clarity? Not all found fault. Quiet admiration began to surface, especially among lesser represented worlds. Species long silenced by complex etiquette found Earth's model liberating. They began emulating aspects of it, shortening speeches, refusing redundant formality, addressing peers without ancestral titles. What had been unthinkable was becoming normalized. Humanity hadn't asked for followers, but their methods offered results impossible to ignore. Resistance remained. A prominent elder species called an emergency session to condemn Earth's influence, labeling their behavior a contagion of insolence. Yet when asked to show concrete harm, they failed. Earth's projects had the highest fulfillment rates. Their proposals consistently included safeguards, scalable benefits, and equitable terms. Not once had they exploited their disregard for custom to gain advantage. They simply functioned without the trappings. The paradox grew louder. Earth was uncouth yet effective. Unrefined yet reliable. Arrogant yet collaborative. Every attempt to shame or sideline them only highlighted the Council's own inefficiencies. Meetings once dominated by ritual were now being scrutinized by younger species demanding progress over pageantry. The humans never argued for superiority. They never claimed tradition had no place. They simply refused to pretend it was required for competence. Their presence forced others to examine long-held beliefs not through ideology, but through consequence. Had form become more valued than function? Were outcomes sacrificed in service of spectacle? An unintended consequence emerged. Internal factions within certain member worlds began challenging their own ceremonial norms. Delegates arrived with shorter introductions, fewer symbolic gestures, and firmer agendas. The council floor, once governed by rhythm and reverence, was shifting in tone, more questions, fewer rehearsed affirmations. Earth had not asked for reform, but reform was underway. Whispers spread among high-ranking members. Earth's influence wasn't temporary. It wasn't a phase. It was structural. The idea that respect required submission had been pierced. And no amount of protocol could obscure the fact that a new standard was being born, one defined not by decorum, but by efficiency, results, and sincerity. Tensions reached their limit when the Council demanded formal compliance from Earth. A vote passed requiring all member species to reaffirm allegiance through the Unified Ritual of Continuance, a symbolic event designed to reinforce harmony through shared tradition. Participation was mandatory. Earth declined. Their response was brief. Our values are not for performance. The message echoed across systems. For many, it was defiance. For others, it was clarity. The Council interpreted refusal as a breach of unity. Sanctions were proposed. Earth's diplomatic status was suspended. Access to several forums was revoked. Committees cited violations of decorum, claiming Earth's presence had disrupted centuries of equilibrium. But Earth didn't plead or retaliate. They continued their work, unfazed. Scientific collaborations remained uninterrupted. Trade proposals flowed directly to interested species, bypassing the ceremonial channels entirely. Then came the inflection point. An influential species invited Earth to a bilateral summit. The Council issued warnings. Attendance without formal reacceptance would violate protocol. Earth joined anyway, virtually, through a real-time link. No ornate background, no symbolic dress, no honorary prefixes. Just data, dialogue, and mutual goals. The summit concluded with new joint ventures, outperforming existing models in speed and implementation. It wasn't just a breach, it was a demonstration. Other species took notice. Quietly, some began canceling their own participation in the ritual. A few cited logistical constraints. Others questioned its necessity. The Council dismissed the trend as temporary dissent, but the erosion was visible. The more pressure was applied to enforce conformity, the more traction Earth's approach gained. Not through rhetoric, but through tangible progress. A second directive followed, an ultimatum dressed in diplomacy. Reaffirm tradition or face exclusion from all joint development projects. Earth's reply was a public statement broadcast across member networks. Compliance for the sake of appearance is not cooperation. Mutual respect doesn't require submission. The message struck at the heart of the Council's identity. For centuries, adherence had been mistaken for unity. Earth was unraveling that illusion with every unbent knee. Some delegates demanded stronger action, fearing collapse of order. But consensus wavered. Punitive measures risked fragmenting already weakening alliances. Earth wasn't a fringe voice. They were now central to infrastructure projects, emergency coordination, and technological exchange. Cutting them off would cause more disruption than their non-compliance ever had. Pressure turned to persuasion. Council officials privately appealed to Earth's representatives, asking for partial participation or symbolic gestures. Even a small concession, they argued, could restore balance. Earth declined every offer, reiterating their position without hostility. They weren't seeking dominance. They were maintaining integrity. Their refusal wasn't rebellion. It was authenticity. The effect spread beyond politics. Educational networks began adopting Earth-style instructional methods, direct, goal-oriented, stripped of ceremonial distractions. Business alliances formed using simplified agreements modeled after Earth's contracts. A cultural shift was unfolding, not pushed by force, but pulled by example. The Council's authority rested on shared perception. Earth disrupted that without confrontation, without aggression, without demanding reform. They simply lived their values and let the results speak. Others, exhausted by hollow tradition, followed not because they were told, but because they saw something better. Attempts to brand Earth as rogue began to fail. The label didn't stick. Their integrity had become undeniable. In every meeting they were excluded from, discussions were noticeably slower, less decisive. The contrast became impossible to ignore. What began as rejection of ritual had become a mirror. The Council was forced to see itself, entangled in ceremony, mistaking repetition for purpose. Earth didn't argue against tradition, they just refused to let it define function. And in that refusal, they exposed the truth the Council had long buried: progress doesn't require theater. It only requires will. The cracks within the Council widened as Earth's example continued reshaping expectations. No declarations were made, no revolutions announced, yet change accelerated. Delegates who once performed flawless ceremonial routines now hesitated, questioning the necessity behind every practiced motion. Questions whispered in corridors now echoed in open forums. Why must form precede function? Why must legacy silence need? Younger civilizations, long relegated to background roles, found new footing by adopting Earth's model. They spoke plainly, submitted unembellished proposals, and achieved rapid progress. Their success wasn't framed in rebellion, it was grounded in outcomes. Without intending to lead, Earth had become the reference point. Their unshaken standards gave others permission to reconsider their own. Council elders viewed this momentum as a threat. A cultural audit was launched, seeking to document all deviations from protocol. The effort backfired. The audit revealed widespread adaptation, not just in diplomacy, but in communication, education, and project management. A new efficiency was growing, not chaotic, not disrespectful, simply unburdened by layers that had lost their meaning. In closed sessions, panic surfaced. The Council's long-standing strength had been rooted in unity through conformity. But now, diversity of expression was yielding better cooperation than uniform behavior ever had. Earth hadn't fractured the system, they had revealed a way to make it breathable. And that revelation proved contagious. Resistance remained, mostly among species whose identities were entwined with ritual. Their objection wasn't to Earth's success, but to what it implied, that centuries of tradition might have been self-imposed obstacles. Their fear wasn't unfounded. Cultural prestige was being re-evaluated, no longer measured by ceremony, but by clarity and results. The center of gravity was shifting. Trade networks mirrored this shift. New routes formed around Earth's simplified systems. Agreement templates spread beyond their origin, optimized for transparency and mutual benefit. Older methods still existed, but they began collecting dust. Adaptation no longer needed permission. It happened because it worked. Educational institutions, once proud of their ancient syllabi, began overhauling curriculum. Earth's models emphasized logic, problem-solving, and accountability. The appeal wasn't in ideology, it was in application. Learners across the galaxy gravitated toward content that equipped rather than impressed. Knowledge became less about recitation and more about relevance. The Council struggled to reassert influence. A proposal to codify mandatory ceremonial standards failed to pass. Too many members abstained. The vote itself marked a turning point, not in policy, but in perception. The Council no longer dictated culture. It responded to it. The idea that tradition could evolve without losing value was no longer radical. It was becoming obvious. Internal divisions deepened. Some members called for a new charter. Others sought to suspend Earth again. Neither approach gained traction. The weight of precedent had given way to the momentum of purpose. Earth didn't fight to remain central, they simply remained useful. And usefulness was no longer optional in a galaxy growing more interconnected by necessity than by symbolism. Even among Earth's critics, grudging respect grew. Their presence didn't seek dominance, only alignment with core principles. They neither celebrated their influence nor distanced from it. They stayed consistent. That consistency, more than any statement, cemented their role. As more species adapted, they didn't lose their identity. Instead, they found better ways to express it. Earth's model hadn't erased differences, it had given them space to matter. Freed from ritual rigidity, dialogue deepened. Conflict didn't vanish, but it became solvable. The barrier of formality was being replaced by the bridge of intention. The Council could no longer deny it. The architecture of interaction had changed. What remained now was not whether Earth belonged in the system, but whether the system itself still resembled what it once was. And in that silent, unavoidable question, a new era took shape, not imposed, not announced, but lived. A resolution passed without fanfare, tucked between agenda items during a routine session. Protocol adherence was reclassified as optional. No speeches marked the decision, no commemorative plaques announced the shift. Yet everyone present understood what it meant. The Council had yielded, not through defeat, but through necessity. Earth hadn't demanded recognition. It had simply demonstrated a way forward others chose to follow. The chamber reflected the change. Rigid formality gave way to practical design. Thrones became seats, hierarchy replaced by horizontal arrangement. The echoes of ceremonial chants were replaced with deliberate silence before discussion. Delegates spoke with intention, no longer buried in layers of inherited expression. What had once seemed immutable now felt obsolete. Earth continued on the same trajectory, unaffected by the approval they never asked for. They maintained direct communication, unfiltered agreements, and transparent collaborations. While others had bent their identities around legacy, Earth's identity had remained unaltered, resilient, grounded in utility and self-respect. Multi-species initiatives, once bogged down by endless formality, now moved with speed. Earth's framework served as the foundation, flexible, open, stripped of ornamental complexity. Implementation replaced abstraction. Delegates found themselves accomplishing in weeks what once took years. Discussions no longer needed translation into protocol. Intention became the universal language. Even among the Council's oldest members, reflection took root. Former critics now referenced Earth's methods in private, noting how clarity brought stability. An elder delegate, once a staunch opponent, quietly endorsed Earth's approach in a technical document, an indirect acknowledgement of influence that said more than 1,000 speeches ever could. Cultural preservation didn't vanish. It evolved. Rituals remained where they carried meaning, not obligation. Species revisited traditions, deciding what served them and what merely signaled compliance. That choice had once been unthinkable. Now it was standard practice. Earth hadn't erased ceremony, it had returned meaning to it by making it voluntary. Younger species, newly inducted, modeled their diplomatic structure on Earth's example. Not out of reverence, but recognition. Efficiency wasn't just practical, it was empowering. Earth's refusal to conform hadn't destabilized the Council, it had revealed a better equilibrium. Without intent to lead, they became the measure by which effectiveness was now judged. Trade, science, governance, all shifted subtly. Earth's presence no longer stirred controversy. It commanded a quiet expectation. Delegates knew when Earth entered a discussion, things would move. Debates focused on content, not format. Agreements were shorter, clearer, and more durable. Trust wasn't won through elaborate gestures. It was built through consistent delivery. The Council's evolution was evident not in proclamations but in behavior. Fewer speeches opened with rehearsed reverence. More began with purpose. Titles shortened. Process maps shrank. The time once spent maintaining appearance was redirected toward shared goals. Collaboration improved not because Earth demanded it, but because they had modeled it without deviation. Their influence extended beyond diplomacy. Educational forums adapted to emphasize function over memorization. Cultural exchanges focused on real values rather than symbols. Even entertainment shifted. Stories emerged of progress through authenticity rather than performance. The narrative arc of the galaxy itself had changed. Earth never claimed credit. Their stance hadn't altered since day one: clarity, respect without subservience, and cooperation on equal footing. Others had finally caught up, not because they were coerced, but because they saw it worked. The transformation wasn't sudden. It was a gradual, undeniable transition, from posturing to progress, from pretense to principle. When the question was finally asked, it needed no answer. Had Earth changed the Council? No. The Council had changed itself, because Earth showed it didn't have to stay the same. And in that realization, a quiet legacy was sealed.